Hi class, in this video we're going over neurons and nervous tissue and also just talking about the nervous system in general. Okay, so the nervous system is broken down into two main areas. The CNS, central nervous system. So this is the central operating area of the body. So this includes the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so that's what sends out information to the rest of our body based on cues or information from our sensory system, okay? And then our other division would be the peripheral nervous system. So you think of like on the periphery, right? So that would be all of our nerves, okay? Okay, so how is the nervous system organized in a little bit more detail, okay? So we have our central nervous system. Again, this is like the operating system of the body, okay? Then we have our sensory division and our motor division of our peripheral nervous system. So this all here is the peripheral nervous system, okay? So let's start with our sensory division. We have somatic and special senses. So somatic would be information we get from our muscles, okay? So if somebody grabs us, right? It causes a stretch in the muscle, okay? That would send information to the central nervous system. So this gets sent to the central nervous system, okay? Information from both the somatic and the special senses. So we went through special senses, right? So that would be things that we see, things that we hear, things that we taste, things that we smell, right? And then also things that we feel, right, would be part of somatic, okay? Sensory division. Okay, so that information gets sent to the central nervous system, so the brain and or spinal cord. The central nervous system integrates that information or kind of interprets what that information might mean if we need to react to whatever we're hearing, feeling, seeing, etc. Okay. Then we have our motor division. So somatic here would be our skeletal muscle. Okay. So the central nervous system integrates the information that we get from our sensory division and maybe sends out a motor output. So it sends information through neurons, right? Neurons are like an information center, right? So they send information down to skeletal muscle, maybe smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, etc. Okay, so in my example of maybe someone grabbing us, right? We get that sensory information from our somatic area of our sensory division. That information gets sent to our central nervous system. Okay, our brain or spinal cord says, oh, somebody's grabbing us, this could be dangerous, let's pull away. Okay, so our skeletal muscle, then our central nervous system sends information to our skeletal muscle in our arm and tells it to pull away. Okay, now, so we have somatic, and also part of our motor division, we have the autonomic nervous system, okay? And this is further divided into the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric system. So let's just talk about enteric quickly. This one we don't get into too much detail about, but the enteric system innervates, okay, or can send information to the smooth muscle and glands of the gastrointestinal tract specifically, okay? So it's like, has its own, the GI tract has its own set of nerves, okay? And then also autonomic, so these are things that we don't control, right? We, besides in reflexes, right, we control our skeletal muscle consciously. So I tell my body when to move, how to move, okay? But I don't tell the glands of my gastrointestinal tract when to secrete things to help me digest food, right? My body does that automatically. So that's the autonomic system. You think it's like on autopilot, right? Then we have our sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But these control our other autonomic systems. So like our heart rate, so cardiac muscle, so smooth muscle in our organs, okay? And glands. So that would be like the endocrine system, which again, you'll learn more about in A&P2, but it does affect the glands as well and tells them to secrete hormones. Okay, so again, we don't control any of those things. I don't tell my heart when to pump, etc. Okay, so that's the autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system. So both of these are part of the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. Okay. So again, cells in the central nervous system communicate via both electrical and chemical signals. Okay, so information is sent through neurons via electrical and chemical signals together. Okay, so the nervous system is very fast and very specific. So information is sent very quickly, whereas with our hormones, information is sent a lot slower over time. Okay, and usually we'll get almost immediate responses, like in my example of grabbing the arm and pulling the arm away. So another example, a more simple example of what's going on here is, say we're thirsty, we see that we have a glass of water on the table. Okay, so that's from our sensory division, from our special senses, from our eyes, right? That's going to send information to the central nervous system. Hey, there's a glass of water right there that is within reach. The central nervous system is going to say, okay, yeah, we're thirsty, right? So it's going to send information to the skeletal muscle and tell it to pick up and take a sip of that water. Okay. So let's talk in more detail about the sensory versus motor division. So sensory is also known as our afferent division, okay? So afferent with an A, so let me just write that here. So this is the afferent division. So afferent like away because it sends information away to the central nervous system, okay? And then our motor division is known as the efferent division, okay? So information gets sent to the motor division, okay? So to what's known as effector organs. So skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands, these are effectors, okay? So when we get into our reflex arcs in Unit 9, effectors are going to be what the central nervous system sends information to as well, okay? So these are all effectors. Okay, and then again within here we have our somatic and our autonomic system. Okay, so we have two different types of nervous tissue. We have neurons, so these are our nerve cells that are electrically excitable and they actually send information to other neurons or to effectors. And we have neuroglia, which are support cells for neurons. So they help to nourish the neurons. There's some that create myelin in both the central and peripheral nervous system, etc. So we're going to go into all of those, okay? And there's different types of neurons as well, okay? So neurons all have a cell body and one or more processes, but there are different types. The most common type that you're going to find in the central nervous system, and the most common type you'll see like pictures of and things, will be multipolar neurons. Okay, so let me just erase this here. So multipolar neurons are going to have the cell body here, okay? They're going to have these dendrites coming off of the cell body, okay? These dendrites are what receive information from other neurons, okay? We would have a nucleus within here as well. Then it kind of pinches in. This here is the axon hillock where it pinches in, okay? And that leads right to the axon, this long tube-like structure. And then we have our terminals. And then these at the end will have our synaptic end bulbs. Okay, and these are what communicate with the next neuron or with an effector. Okay. Okay. So here's our axon. It could be myelinated and unmyelinated. So let's say this one has myelin. Okay. So it has like these sheets of myelin surrounding different areas of the axon. Okay, so there's my bad drawing of a multipolar neuron. Okay, I just want to go over the difference between what tracts are and nerves. So tracts are bundles of these neurons. So a bunch of neurons together within the central nervous system. And then nerves are bundles of neuron processes in the peripheral nervous system, okay? So processes would be either dendrites or axons, okay? So tract neuron processes in the central nervous system, nerves in the peripheral nervous system, okay? So these here are myelin, okay? And these are made by Schwann cells or oligodendrocytes, depending on if we're in the central or peripheral nervous system. And then there's these little spaces of areas that are not myelinated. These are myelin sheath gaps, or also known as nodes of Ranvier. So this is where the signal will be sent along the axon. It kind of jumps these myelin sheaths and only goes through these gaps, okay? So movement of a signal only moves in one direction, so away from the cell body. It's known as anterograde. But things can be sent back to the cell body, not signals, but like organelles that need to be degraded, that are too old and things like that. That's known as retrograde, right? Retro is like going back. Okay, so anterograde, that will be all cell signals only move in one direction, but things that are no longer viable can move retrograde back to the cell body. Okay. Okay. So I showed you here a myelinated fiber. We can also have non-myelinated fibers. In non-myelinated fibers, right, if we didn't have this myelin here, the information needs to go through each little portion of this axon. So information is sent a lot slower in unmyelinated neurons. Okay, but there are lots of unmyelinated neurons as well. Okay, it's not just myelinated. Okay, so white matter in the brain and spinal cord would be myelinated axons, because this myelin is like a whitish light yellow color. Unmyelinated neurons would be found in gray matter. Okay, so you know the difference between white matter and gray matter. White matter, you would find myelination. Gray matter, you would find unmyelinated neurons. Okay, but mostly in gray matter, you see neuron cell bodies. Okay, so let's get into the different classifications of neurons. We talked about multipolar, okay, 3 or more processes. Bipolar has 2 processes, so just one axon and one dendrite coming off the other side. And unipolar is like one T-like process. So it's kind of like this. You have the process and then the cell body sticks out here. This is unipolar, okay? It's also sometimes called pseudo-unipolar, but you can just call it unipolar, okay? So this type, the unipolar, is found mostly in the peripheral nervous system, okay? So this would be like a sensory neuron, okay? Whereas these are found mostly in the central nervous system. And then our bipolar ones are rare, okay? So in bipolar, you'd have like one side that has dendrites coming off, okay? Then you would have in the middle your cell body with your nucleus. And then the other side, you would have your axon terminals coming off, okay? So it looks something like that. So these ones are very rare. They're only found in special sensory organs, like in the olfactory mucosae and in the eye and ear. So in our special sense organs there, okay? Another thing we didn't talk about was interneurons. So when I talked about from the sensory system, information being sent to the central nervous system, in the central nervous system, we have interneurons. So it's these in-between neurons that interpret the information that is being sent from these sensory neurons. And then we have our motor neurons, which carry impulses to our effector cells. Okay, neuroglia, those are the support cells for our neurons. Those ones are not electrically excitable. They don't send information, they just support our neurons, which do send information and are electrically excitable. Okay, so these ones can multiply and divide, unlike neurons, okay? So there are 4 in the central nervous system and 2 main ones in the peripheral, okay? So in the central nervous system, we have first astrocytes. Okay, so astrocytes are the most abundant glial cells or neuroglia. Both names are acceptable. So these will be like attached to the neurons, and they support neurons, they help bring them nutrients, they help guide young neurons that have been newly made, okay? And they can help influence neuron processing or functioning, okay? Then we have microglial cells. Micro, they're very, very tiny, okay? Let me just write this down. Microglial. Okay, microglial cells, they also touch the neuron and help to monitor the neuron, okay? So they help to protect the neuron from any sort of debris or something harmful by kind of eating it up, okay? Then we have ependymil cells. Ependymil cells, these can be ciliated and they help to move along cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, we'll talk about cerebrospinal fluid in a little bit. Okay, and they help to bathe the cells in cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, and then finally we have oligodendrocytes. These are the cells that make the myelin sheaths in the central nervous system. Oligodendrocytes. Okay, in the peripheral nervous system, we have Schwann cells. These are what create the myelin sheaths in peripheral nervous system, so Schwann cells. Okay, so I just wanted to show the similarities there. And then we have satellite cells in the peripheral nervous system. And these are basically like the astrocytes of the central nervous system. They do loads of different things. Satellite cells, okay? So those are the 2 you would find in the peripheral nervous system and what they're kind of similar to in the central nervous system. Nothing similar to microglial or ependymil cells in the peripheral nervous system. Okay. Okay, so now I want you to go and watch the action potential PowerPoint, and then I'll make a second video going over the rest of the PowerPoint after you learn about action potentials.